Scientists have found genetic code inside living humans that does not belong to any known ancestor. No fossil explains it. No skull bears its face. No grave has opened and given the stranger a name. The body is missing. Only the trace remains, silent, patient, and still moving inside the living. These fragments are called ghost DNA, not because they are spirits, but because something entered the human lineage and left its signature behind. The code is there, the ancestor is not. Science does not call this Nephilim, and science does not prove that angels descended into flesh. But the oldest forbidden text asked the same question 3,000 years ago. What if humanity was never one clean line? What if something crossed into us before history learned how to write warnings? And what if the oldest monster stories were not about things outside the human world, but about a trace that entered the human archive and never fully left? Chapter 1. The Ancestor with No Body. The modern story begins under cold, fluorescent light, not beneath storm clouds. It begins with researchers reading genomes like sealed prophetic scrolls. Line after line, sequence after sequence, the human code appears ordinary until it does not. Some fragments behave as if they came from somewhere older than the known map. They do not sit neatly with Neanderthal or Denisovan inheritance. They do not point cleanly to any fossil population already given a name. The phrase for that kind of absence is ghost DNA, not a curse, not an apparition, not a demon hiding in the chromosome. A ghost population is an extinct group inferred from the marks it left behind. That is why the idea is so disturbing. A bone can be measured, dated, photographed, and placed under glass. A skull can be rebuilt until a forgotten face stares back from the museum dark. But this ancestor has almost nothing to show. No temple, no alphabet, no remembered kingdom, no carved idol standing in sand. Only a statistical shadow, interrupting the clean story we prefer to tell about ourselves. It is as if someone erased the body but forgot to erase the signature. And that signature did not remain in the ground. It entered inheritance, crossed generations, and moved forward with the living. It survived in ordinary bodies, under ordinary faces, inside ordinary family lines. This is the first horror of ghost ancestry. The unknown is not sealed behind us. It may be carried with us. Every cell becomes an archive room, and every lineage becomes a corridor of locked doors. Most doors have names written on them: mother, father, tribe, migration, nation, species. But one door has no name at all. Behind it waits a contributor with no recovered face. Modern science approaches that door carefully, with models, probability, and restraint. Myth approaches the same door differently. Myth hears something breathing behind it, and in the oldest biblical shadows, that breath has a name. Chapter 2. The Shadow That Would Not Stay Dead. The most frightening part is not that an unknown population existed. Human origins were never a single straight road. The frightening part is that this vanished group did not remain separate. At some point, the boundary failed. Two human worlds touched, and the contact became inheritance. No monument marks the meeting, and no surviving witness tells us what the first encounter looked like. No ancient song remembers whether it began in fear, hunger, exile, or desire. Only the genome kept the record, and the genome kept it with terrifying patience. Long after the bodies disappeared, the trace remained inside living populations. Long after memory became dust, the trace remained as a pattern waiting to be read. This is where science becomes colder than myth. Myth gives the stranger a name. Science sometimes gives only the scar in the pattern. When that scar points to someone unknown, the imagination returns to the oldest forbidden story. A story where the human line was crossed, and the crossing did not end cleanly. Chapter 3. Genesis opens the wrong door. Genesis does not explain the Nephilim carefully, and that is exactly why the passage still feels dangerous. It appears like a torn fragment from a larger nightmare. The sons of God saw the daughters of men. They crossed toward the human world. And from that crossing came the Nephilim, the mighty ones of old, the men of renown. The text gives no laboratory, no anatomy lesson, and no calm explanation. It gives only a violation of categories. Something above moved toward something below. Something not merely human became involved in human inheritance. Then the world darkens toward judgment. This is why the passage never loses its grip. It is not only about giants, it is about origin. It is about the possibility that a line can be altered at its root. The horror is not height, the horror is descent. The idea that what entered humanity did not stand outside the city gates. It entered households, names, bodies, and the future itself. It became part of the next generation before anyone understood the cost. Ancient people did not know genes, chromosomes, or the chemical alphabet hidden inside flesh. But they understood inheritance. They understood that what enters the line does not simply leave. A deed can be denied. A body can be buried. A forbidden union can be hidden behind silence. But lineage remembers in ways the mouth cannot control. That is why Genesis feels so cold. It describes the boundary breaking, then moves toward the flood. The rain no longer feels like weather. It feels like a divine response to a damaged archive. The pre-flood world becomes a place where ancestry is no longer safe, a place where human history is no longer entirely human, a place where the family line itself becomes a haunted structure. Every birth is no longer only continuation. It becomes evidence that something has already passed through the threshold. And the terrible thing about a threshold is that it only matters before it is crossed. Afterward, the door may be closed, but the crossing has already happened. The world after Genesis 6 feels like that kind of world. Not a world waiting for corruption, a world already carrying it. The Nephilim are remembered as mighty, famous, impossible to ignore. But fame in ancient texts is not always glory. Sometimes, renown means the wound became too large to hide. Sometimes a name survives because the damage around it was unforgettable. The Nephilim do not enter the story like ordinary warriors. They enter as a sign that the boundary between realms has failed. They are not only bodies moving through the ancient earth. They are the visible consequence of an invisible breach. And beneath that thought waits the question the title has already planted. If the ancient fear was corruption of lineage, what would they have called ghost DNA? Chapter 4. The Watchers choose the descent. The Book of Enoch opens the wound wider. It names the beings as Watchers. It places them on a mountain and gives the rebellion a ritual shape. They do not drift accidentally into the human world. They gather, look down, and understand that crossing the boundary will bring judgment. Still, they bind themselves together. 200 Watchers descend on Mount Hermon. Not one isolated rebel, not one private mistake. A collective act witnessed by heaven and sealed by oath. That detail changes everything. The horror is no longer impulse. It is conspiracy. The Watchers swear they will not abandon the plan. They make the descent irreversible by sharing the guilt. No one can return innocent if everyone descends together. The mountain becomes more than a location. It becomes the altar of a forbidden decision. Above it, the heavens remain sealed in order. Below it, the human world waits without knowing what is coming. Then, the ancient world receives what it should never have received. Forbidden knowledge begins moving through human civilization like a second infection. Weapons, ornaments, enchantments, signs in the heavens, arts sharpened beyond wisdom. The corruption does not arrive only through bodies. It arrives through instruction. Humanity is taught to change itself faster than wisdom can contain. The Watchers do not merely cross into flesh. They cross into culture, craft, desire, war, beauty, and power. And from the forbidden crossing come the giants. The Nephilim become consequences walking on the earth. Bodies turned into monuments of rebellion. Names too large for ordinary memory. The earth groans beneath what the boundary produced. Violence spreads. and the world becomes too altered to heal by ordinary means. In Enoch, the sin is not only that heaven touched earth. The sin is that heaven made earth unable to return to innocence. Once forbidden knowledge enters civilization, no flood can make humanity unknow it. Once a lineage is altered, no silence can fully erase the contact. This is why the Watcher's story fits the ghost Deanna nightmare so perfectly. It is a story about a trace that outlives the trespass. A crime committed in one age, still echoing inside another. Chapter 5. The Bloodline Remembers. Now, return to the laboratory. Return to the quiet room where no angel speaks, where no ancient voice interrupts the fluorescent hum. The researcher is not reading Enoch, and the machine is not hunting giants. The screen does not know fear, judgment, or forbidden descent. It only reports inheritance. And inheritance is the one place where ancient dread and modern science cannot fully separate. Every culture invents origin stories because origin controls identity. Who made us? Who touched us? Who changed us before we knew ourselves? Modern genetics answers some of those questions with astonishing precision, but sometimes it answers with a shadow, a signal from a population without a confirmed body, a lineage with no recovered face, a contact event with no surviving witness. That absence is not proof of Nephilim. It is not proof of Watchers, but it makes the ancient fear understandable again. The fear that humanity was shaped by encounters it did not control. The fear that the present carries contact from before memory began. The fear that lineage is not a clean river but a dark confluence. Many streams entered it. Some are named, some are fossilized, and some are mapped with confidence. And some remain hidden under the surface, moving silently through the living. The Nephilim story survives because it gives terror a shape. It says there was a time when the human boundary was not guarded. It says something crossed, and the result became famous, violent, and impossible to ignore. Science cannot confirm that myth, but science confirms a colder truth. Human ancestry is braided with vanished populations. It contains traces of meetings no one remembers. It carries the dead forward in biological silence, and that silence is more frightening than thunder. Thunder announces itself, but DNA waits inside the body until a future machine learns how to read the scar. A myth can be dismissed as primitive fear. A fossil can be locked away in a museum drawer. But a sequence inside the living cannot be dismissed so easily. It is not asking to be believed, it is already present. The unknown ancestor does not need a temple, does not need worship, does not need a surviving language. It only needs inheritance to continue doing what inheritance does: copying, dividing, surviving, moving onward. That is why ghost DNA feels almost theological in its silence. It suggests that the past can enter the body and wait there without permission. It suggests that extinction is not always disappearance. Sometimes extinction leaves behind a whisper inside another line, and once that whisper becomes part of the archive, it is no longer outside humanity. It is one of the forces that helped shape what humanity became. This is where the ancient imagination would have trembled. Because to an ancient mind, a mixed line was never only biological. It was moral, it was spiritual, it was cosmic. Bloodline meant blessing, curse, promise, inheritance, judgment, and identity. To alter the line was to alter the future before the future could defend itself. That is why the Nephilim remain so disturbing. They are not remembered as random monsters wandering the edge of civilization. They are remembered as the sign that the boundary had already failed. And when a boundary fails at the level of origin, everything after it becomes uncertain. Chapter 6. The Name Beneath the Name. So, what was the ghost population? A lost, archaic human group, a vanished branch of humanity, a people without a recovered body. That is the responsible answer. The answer the evidence allows. But monster mythos lives where evidence and ancient dread stare at each other across the dark. Genesis did not warn about fossils. It warned about a crossing. Enoch did not imagine a sequencing machine. It imagined beings who violated the architecture of creation. Modern genetics does not discover angels, but it does reveal that the human story is haunted by missing contributors. Ancestors who entered the line and disappeared from sight. That is the bridge, not proof, not certainty, a terrible resemblance. The scientists say ghost DNA. The old texts say Nephilim. One is a model, one is a myth, but both point toward the same abyssal fear that humanity carries traces from meetings it cannot fully explain, that the past is not safely dead, that what touched the line may remain after the name is gone. The flood could erase cities, and time could erase bones. The earth could close over every forbidden grave. The names of the Watchers could be buried in forbidden books. The memory of the Nephilim could be broken into fragments and arguments. But if something entered inheritance, destruction was never complete. The record survived in the one place no ancient king could burn, inside the living. And perhaps that is why the Nephilim never truly vanish from imagination. The most frightening giants are not the ones still walking the earth. They are the ones reduced to a signal, a fragment, a shadow in the code, a name beneath the name, a vanished source beneath the face, a buried crossing beneath the family line, waiting for humanity to become advanced enough to discover that the archive was never clean. And when the machine finally reads the ghost, it does not tell us a legend is true. It tells us something worse. It tells us the human story still contains locked rooms, and some of those rooms were occupied before we had names for the things inside them.